My name is Bernadette. I'm 47 years old. The phone buzzing at 2 a.m. pulled me from the kind of deep sleep I hadn't had in months. That harsh blue light cutting through my bedroom felt wrong, like someone had turned on fluorescence in church during prayer. I reached across the cool cotton sheets, Mama's old ones, the ones she'd line-dried every Sunday after service, and my fingers found the warm metal of his phone where he'd left it charging. The screen showed a name I didn't recognize. Keisha. My heart dropped straight into my stomach like a stone in sweet tea. The message preview made my hands shake. Baby, I can't sleep thinking about earlier. I set that phone down like it was hot coals from Sister William's wood stove. The bergamot scent from my evening Earl Grey still lingered in the air, mixing with the cocoa butter I'd smoothed over my arms before bed. Now, both smells made me nauseous. 47 years old, and I was sitting here in my own bedroom, the one I'd painted lavender because it reminded me of the wildflowers behind Grandmama's house, staring at evidence that my marriage might be crumbling. The silk scarf I'd tied around my edges felt too tight suddenly, like it was choking me instead of protecting my hair. I could hear my daughter Jasmine's voice from last month. Mama, you deserve better than settling. She'd said it while braiding my hair in her kitchen. Her fingers gentle, but her words sharp. I'd brushed her off then, told her she was reading too much into things. Now, with that phone glowing like an accusation on my nightstand, her words felt prophetic. The house around me was too quiet. No gospel music drifting from the kitchen radio, no sound of grease popping in cast iron as I made Sunday breakfast. Just me and this terrible knowledge that everything I thought I knew about my life might be a lie. My wedding ring caught the moonlight streaming through our bedroom window, the same window where I used to stand and wave goodbye each morning, watching him drive away to work. Or at least, I thought it was work. I pulled my knees to my chest, feeling the worn softness of my cotton nightgown against my skin. The same kind Mama used to wear, practical and comfortable. Nothing like what some young woman named Keisha probably wore to bed. Nothing like what she probably wore when she was with my husband, calling him baby, like she had every right. The phone buzzed again, and I jumped like someone had slapped me. Another message from her. I couldn't bring myself to look, but I couldn't look away either. This moment felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that once I stepped forward, there'd be no going back to the woman I was 5 minutes ago. I couldn't stay in that bed another second. The lavender walls that used to comfort me felt like they were closing in, and that phone kept buzzing like an angry wasp trapped in a jar. I slipped my feet into my house slippers, the fuzzy ones Jasmine got me for Christmas, and padded down the hallway toward the kitchen. The hardwood floors creaked under my weight, each sound echoing through the house like secrets being whispered. I needed something to do with my hands, something to stop them from shaking. The kitchen called to me the way it always did when my world felt unsteady. I pulled out Mama's cast iron skillet and set it on the stove. The familiar weight of it in my hands steadied me some. If I was going to be awake at 2:30 in the morning, I might as well make some cornbread. Mama always said cooking was prayer work. Mixing and measuring kept your hands busy while your heart sorted itself out. The cornmeal felt gritty between my fingers as I measured it into Grandmama's old ceramic bowl, the one with the tiny chip on the rim that nobody ever threw away because it still held love just fine. I was reaching for the buttermilk when my own phone, started ringing from the counter. Lord, I muttered, seeing my sister Denise's name on the screen. She lived in California now, 3 hours behind, but she'd always been a night owl. Hey, Dee! Bernie? Girl, why do you sound like somebody died? Her voice came through clear and concerned, That same tone she'd used when we were teenagers and I'd call her crying about some boy. I hadn't realized how my voice sounded until she said it. Hollow, like I was speaking from the bottom of a well. "I'm fine, just couldn't sleep." "Uh-huh, and I'm Beyoncé. What's wrong?" I set the bowl down and leaned against the counter. The cool marble pressed into my hip bones, grounding me in my own kitchen, in my own life that suddenly felt like someone else's. "Denise, if you found something that might change everything, would you want to know? Or would you rather keep living like you didn't see it?" The silence stretched long enough for me to hear the gospel station playing low on her end, Kirk Franklin's voice drifting through the phone like a blessing. Finally, she sighed. "Bernie, what did you find?" "I don't know if I should—" "Sister, we've been through too much together for you to start keeping secrets now. Tell me." So I did. I told her about the phone, about Keisha with her heart emoji, about the message that made my stomach turn inside out. Denise listened without interrupting, the way she'd learned to do during all those years I'd called her crying about smaller things. "How long you think it's been going on?" she asked when I finished. "I don't know. I keep thinking about all the late nights, all the times he said he was working overtime." I opened the refrigerator and pulled out eggs, needing to keep my hands moving. The cold air hit my face like a slap of reality. "Maybe I'm the fool everyone's been pitying." "Now you stop that right there." Denise's voice got sharp, the way it did when we were kids and someone tried to mess with me at school. "You are not a fool for trusting your husband. He's the fool if he's throwing away what you built together." I cracked an egg into the bowl, watching the yellow yolk break and bleed into the cornmeal. But what if I confront him and I'm wrong? What if it's innocent and I just destroyed our marriage over nothing? And what if you don't confront him and you're right? "Bernie, you can't unknow what you know now. That phone ain't going to stop buzzing, and you ain't going to stop wondering every time he leaves the house." She was right. I could feel it in the way my shoulders had tensed up, in the way I kept glancing toward the stairs, like he might come down and catch me talking about him. The not knowing would eat me alive, one midnight phone buzz at a time. "I'm scared, Dee." "I know you are. But remember what Mama used to say? The truth might hurt, but lies will kill you slow." I could hear her moving around, probably making her own middle-of-the-night snack. "You want me to come out there? I can get a flight tomorrow." The offer made my throat tight with gratitude. "No, baby. I need to handle this myself." "But stay close to your phone?" "Always do for you." After we hung up, I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the beginnings of cornbread I no longer wanted to make. The house felt different now, like the walls were holding secrets I hadn't noticed before. Every family photo on the refrigerator, every coffee mug in the sink, every ordinary Tuesday night thing suddenly looked suspicious. I walked back upstairs, my heart hammering against my ribs like Sunday morning tambourines. His phone was still there on the nightstand, still glowing with possibility and destruction. But now, I knew what I had to do. I was going to read every single message. My fingers trembled as I picked up that phone again, the screen lighting up my face in the dark bedroom. The weight of it felt heavier now, like holding evidence that could blow my whole life apart. I swiped to unlock it. No passcode, which should have been my first clue something was off. In 23 years of marriage, when had my husband ever left his phone unlocked? The messages with Keisha were right there at the top, taunting me with that little heart emoji. I pressed on them, my thumb moving before my brain could stop it. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Same place?" "You know it, beautiful. 2 p.m. like always." "I've been thinking about what you said. You're right. It's time." My stomach dropped straight through the floor. Time for what? I scrolled up, reading weeks of messages that painted a picture I didn't want to see. Pet names, inside jokes, plans made around my work schedule. The cornbread I'd been mixing downstairs suddenly felt like concrete in my belly. But it was the photo that nearly made me drop the phone. A woman with honey-colored skin and perfectly laid edges, wearing a red dress that hugged her curves in all the right places. She was younger than me, had to be, with that smooth face and that confident smile. The kind of woman who probably didn't have stretch marks or gray roots that needed touching up every 6 weeks. Lord Jesus, I whispered, my voice cracking in the quiet room. I kept scrolling, each message a tiny cut that added up to one big bleeding wound. There were references to places they'd been together. The new restaurant downtown where I'd been wanting to go. The jazz club I'd mentioned for our anniversary. He'd been taking her to all the spots that were supposed to be ours. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped church rope around my ribs and pulled it taut. The bergamot scent from my evening tea still lingered on my breath. But now, it tasted bitter, wrong. I set the phone down and pressed my palms against my temples, trying to stop the room from spinning. That's when I heard it, the soft creak of floorboards in the hallway. I grabbed the phone and shoved it back where I'd found it, my heart hammering so loud I was sure it would wake him up. The bedroom door opened just as I settled back under our wedding quilt, the one his mama had made us with scraps from family dresses. "Bernie, you okay, baby?" His voice was thick with sleep, concerned. The same voice that used to calm me during thunderstorms when we were newlyweds. I kept my eyes closed, forcing my breathing to stay even. Just restless. Go back to sleep. He padded to the bathroom, and I heard the soft splash of him using the toilet, then the tap running while he washed his hands. Normal husband sounds. Sounds I'd been hearing for over 2 decades. When he climbed back into bed, the mattress dipped toward him like it always did. "You sure you're all right?" He reached over and touched my shoulder. His fingers warm through my cotton nightgown. I wanted to scream. I wanted to roll over and demand answers. I wanted to ask him who Keisha was and why she was texting him about tomorrow at 2 p.m. Instead, I made a soft sound and pretended to drift back to sleep. But sleep wasn't coming anywhere near me. I lay there, listening to his breathing even out, feeling the heat from his body across the small space between us. This was the man who'd held my hand during 18 hours of labor with Jasmine, who'd driven me to the emergency room at 3 a.m. when Mama had her heart attack, who'd slow danced with me in this very bedroom just last month, humming Al Green while I laughed and stepped on his toes. How long had he been living this double life? The red numbers on the alarm clock glowed 3:47 a.m. when I finally gave up on sleep. I slipped out of bed again, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. But this time, instead of going to the kitchen, I found myself in Jasmine's old room. She'd moved out 2 years ago, but I'd kept it exactly the same. Her debate team trophies on the dresser, her Howard University pennant on the wall, her bookshelf still packed with everything from Zora Neale Hurston to Octavia Butler. I sat on her bed and pulled one of her old journals from the nightstand drawer, the purple one with the broken lock. I wasn't snooping. These were things she'd left behind, things she'd told me I could read if I ever missed her too much. But tonight, I needed to hear my daughter's voice, even if it was just her teenage thoughts written in purple ink. "Mama always says I should never settle for less than I deserve. But how do you know what you deserve when you've never seen it? How do you know what love is supposed to look like when the examples around you keep changing?" The words hit me like a slap. This was from 3 years ago, when she was a senior in high school, watching me and her father navigate one of our rough patches. Had she seen something even then that I'd missed? I flipped through more pages, looking for answers in my daughter's wisdom. Dad came home with flowers today. Not because it's a special day, but because Mama looked sad at breakfast. That's love, right? Noticing when someone's heart is heavy and trying to make it lighter? But then, a few pages later, why does Dad's phone always buzz during family dinner? And why does he take it to another room to answer? Mama pretends not to notice, but I see how her smile gets smaller each time he walks away. My hands started shaking again. Even my teenage daughter had noticed. How had I convinced myself it was nothing? I closed the journal and held it against my chest, breathing in the faint scent of her favorite lotion. Cocoa butter and vanilla that still clung to her pillowcase. Outside, the first birds were starting to chirp, but dawn felt like it was still hours away. Tomorrow, today, really, I was going to have to face him. I was going to have to decide whether to pretend I hadn't seen those messages or whether to blow up our life as we knew it. But first, I was going to call in sick to work, because there was no way I could sit through parent-teacher conferences and budget meetings while my marriage was falling apart one text message at a time. The phone buzzed again from our bedroom, and this time, I didn't need to see it to know who was texting. 2 p.m. couldn't come soon enough for them, but it was coming too fast for me. I must have dozed off in Jasmine's bed, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through her sheer curtains, and I could hear him moving around downstairs. The smell of coffee drifted up. Not the good stuff I bought, but that cheap brand he preferred. My neck ached from sleeping propped against her headboard, and my mouth tasted like I'd been chewing on pennies all night. The clock on her nightstand read 7:15 a.m. I'd slept maybe an hour. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, that familiar pattern. Skip the third step that creaks, heavy on the landing. Then his voice, calling up, "Bernie, you want some coffee before I head out?" Head out. To meet her at 2 p.m. probably. My stomach clenched like I'd swallowed glass. "I'm good," I called back, surprised by how normal I sounded. "Running late for work." "All right, baby. Love you." The words hung in the air like smoke. 23 years of love you at the door, and now I didn't know what any of them meant. I heard the front door close, then his car backing out of the driveway. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. In our bathroom, I caught sight of myself in the mirror above the sink. Lord have mercy. My silk scarf had come loose in the night, and my hair was matted on one side, sticking up on the other. My eyes looked like I'd been in a fight and lost. The burgundy circles under them matched the wine stain on our bedroom carpet from last year's anniversary dinner. I turned the shower as hot as I could stand it and let the steam fog up the mirror. Under the spray, I pressed my forehead against the cool tiles and finally let myself cry. Not the quiet tears from last night, but the kind that come from deep in your chest. The kind that leave you gasping. The water ran cold before I was done. By 8:30, I was dressed and sitting in my car in the school parking lot, but I couldn't make myself go inside. My phone kept buzzing with messages from my principal about the morning faculty meeting, but I couldn't focus on anything except the weight in my chest. That's when I saw Sister Gladys from church walking across the lot in her teacher heels, that heavy gardenia perfume reaching me even through my closed windows. She taught 3rd grade in the building next to mine, and she had a way of seeing straight through people's business face to their heart. Before I could duck down or drive away, she was tapping on my window. "Bernadette Washington, what are you doing sitting out here looking like somebody stole your last dollar?" I rolled the window down, and she took one look at my face and shook her head. That's what I thought. Get out of that car right now." Sister Gladys, I'm fine. Just, child, please. I raised 5 daughters and buried a husband. I know fine when I see it, and this ain't it. She opened my car door like she owned it. Come on. I found myself following her across the parking lot, my legs moving without my permission. She led me not toward the school building, but to her old Buick, where she kept a thermos of sweet tea that could cure anything short of death itself. She poured tea into 2 paper cups from the glove compartment and handed me one. The liquid was amber dark and sweet enough to make your teeth ache, exactly the way my grandmother used to make it. Now, she said, settling her ample frame against the hood of her car. What's got you looking like the world's about to end? I took a sip of tea and felt something in my chest loosen just a fraction. I can't. Sister Gladys, I don't even know where to start. Start with what's got you sitting in a parking lot at 8:30 in the morning instead of in that classroom where you belong. The words came out in a rush before I could stop them. I think my husband's having an affair. She didn't gasp or look shocked. She just nodded like she'd been waiting for me to figure it out. What makes you think that? Text messages, pictures, plans to meet up today at 2 p.m. My voice cracked on the last part. 23 years, Sister Gladys. We've been married 23 years. She was quiet for a long moment, just sipping her tea and watching a group of teachers hurry toward the building. Finally, she spoke. You know what I told my oldest daughter when she caught her husband stepping out? I shook my head. I told her, baby, finding out ain't the hard part. The hard part is deciding what you're going to do with what you know. She reached over and squeezed my hand, her skin soft and warm from years of cocoa butter. Because once you know, you can't unknow. And whatever you do next, that's going to define the rest of your story. A group of students walked by, laughing about something, and I realized how strange we must look. 2 middle-aged black women having a crisis meeting next to a Buick before first period. I keep thinking about Jasmine, I said. About all the times she's told me I deserve better. Like maybe she saw this coming before I did. Children see everything, Sister Gladys said. They just don't always know what to do with what they see. But you're not a child, Bernadette. You're a grown woman with choices. She finished her tea and crumpled the cup in her fist. You going to work today? I shook my head. I called in sick. I can't pretend everything's normal when my whole life just fell apart. Good, then you got time to think. And maybe time to do some investigating of your own. She gave me a look that was part grandmother, part detective. Because if you're going to make a decision about your marriage, you need to know exactly what you're dealing with. The first bell rang across the parking lot, and she straightened up, smoothing down her skirt. You call me if you need anything, you hear? And, Bernadette? She waited until I looked at her. Whatever you decide to do, make sure it's something you can live with, because 23 years is a long time, but the rest of your life is longer. She walked away toward the school building, leaving me alone with my tea and the weight of her words. 2 p.m. was still hours away, but suddenly, I knew exactly where I was going to be when it arrived. I drove to Denise's old neighborhood first, the one where we grew up, needing to think somewhere that felt like home. The houses looked smaller than I remembered, their paint peeling and porches sagging, but Mrs. Henderson's rose bushes were still blooming fierce and pink against her chain-link fence. I parked under the oak tree where Denise and I used to climb and called my principal, letting my voice crack just enough to sound authentically sick. Then I sat there with the windows down, breathing in the smell of honeysuckle and somebody's bacon from 3 houses over, trying to figure out what Sister Gladys meant about investigating. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Working late tonight. Don't wait up. Working late. Right. The lie sat between my ribs like broken glass, sharp every time I breathed. I stared at the message until the letters blurred, then did something I'd never done in 23 years of marriage. I drove to his job. The community college where Marcus taught welding sat on the east side of town, all brick and small windows, surrounded by pickup trucks and motorcycles. I'd been here exactly twice, once for his retirement party that never happened, once for a Christmas faculty thing I'd begged out of early. I parked across the street at the gas station and waited, engine running, watching the main entrance like some kind of private detective. Students came and went, mostly young men in work boots and women my age going back to school. The smell of diesel fuel mixed with the coconut oil I'd rubbed into my scalp that morning, making my stomach turn. At 11:30, Marcus walked out. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched him cross the parking lot, moving with that easy stride that had first caught my attention when we were both 19. He got into his truck, our truck, the one we'd bought together 3 years ago, and pulled out of the lot. I followed him. The drive took 15 minutes, winding through neighborhoods I barely knew, past strip malls and apartment complexes, until he pulled into the parking lot of a place called Rosie's Diner. It was the kind of restaurant I'd pointed out a dozen times, saying we should try it sometime, and he'd always said it looked too crowded, too loud, not worth the trouble. But apparently, it was worth the trouble for Keisha. I parked behind a landscaping truck and watched through my rearview mirror as Marcus walked into the diner, checking his phone, smoothing down his shirt. The shirt I'd ironed for him Sunday night, telling him he looked handsome, kissing his cheek while he stood in front of our bedroom mirror. 20 minutes later, she showed up. Young, maybe 25, with long box braids and legs that went on forever under a sundress that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She walked into that diner like she owned it, hips swaying, confidence radiating from every step. I sat in my car for 2 hours, watching through the windows as they held hands across a table, as he fed her bites of pie, as she threw back her head and laughed at something he said. The same laugh I used to get when we were dating, before bills and teenagers and routine wore us down to polite conversation over morning coffee. The worst part wasn't seeing them together. The worst part was seeing Marcus look alive in a way I couldn't remember him looking with me in years. When they finally came out, she kissed him right there in the parking lot, her hands tangled in his hair, his arms wrapped around her waist like she might disappear if he let go. Then she got into a white Camaro and drove away, and Marcus stood there watching her go with this smile on his face that made my chest ache. I followed him back to work, then drove home on autopilot, my hands shaking so hard I could barely grip the steering wheel. At home, I walked through our house like I was seeing it for the first time. The family photos on the mantel, Marcus's reading glasses on the coffee table, the throw pillows I'd picked out that he'd complained were too fancy. Everything looked the same, but it felt hollow now, like a movie set of a life instead of an actual life. I found myself in Jasmine's old room, sitting on the bed where I'd slept last night, staring at her high school graduation photo. She was smiling in that picture, proud and ready to take on the world, but her eyes held something I was just now recognizing. Pity, not for herself, but for me. How long had everyone known except me? My phone rang. Denise, calling from California like she could sense I was falling apart from 3,000 miles away. Hey sis, how you holding up today? I followed him, I said without preamble. To lunch, with her. Silence stretched across the continent between us. Bernie baby, what did you see? Everything. The way he looked at her, the way she looked at him, the way he used to look at me. My voice broke on the last word. Denise, what am I supposed to do with this? How am I supposed to go back to making his coffee and ironing his shirts and pretending I don't know? You're not, she said firmly. You can't unknow what you know now. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I lay back on Jasmine's old bed, staring at the ceiling where she'd stuck glow-in-the-dark stars when she was 12. They were still there, faded but persistent. I don't know how to do this, Denise. I don't know how to be the woman who catches her husband cheating. That's not who I am. Maybe it's time to figure out who you are, she said gently. Because the woman you've been? She's been settling for crumbs while somebody else got the whole meal. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet house, listening to the clock tick in the hallway, feeling the weight of 23 years pressing down on my shoulders. At 4:30, I heard Marcus's truck in the driveway, heard his key in the lock. Bernie, you home? How you feeling, baby? His voice carried down the hall, casual and concerned, like he hadn't just spent 2 hours holding another woman's hand. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, tasting the salt of tears I hadn't realized I was crying. I'm fine, I called back, my voice steady as Sunday morning. Just resting. But I wasn't fine, and for the first time in years, I was done pretending I was. I waited until I heard Marcus settle into his recliner, heard the TV click onto ESPN, before I made my way to the kitchen. My bare feet found the cold linoleum, and I stood there for a moment, letting the chill travel up through my bones. I needed to do something with my hands, something that would make sense of the chaos spinning in my chest. Without thinking, I reached for Mama's old mixing bowl, the heavy ceramic one with the chip on the rim that I'd inherited when she passed 5 years ago. The weight of it in my hands felt solid, real, like an anchor in the storm. Cornbread. That's what my body was telling me to make. Not the boxed kind Marcus preferred, but Mama's recipe that I knew by heart, the one she'd taught me standing on a step stool in her kitchen when I was 8 years old. I pulled out the yellow cornmeal, the one in the cloth sack that cost twice as much as the regular kind, but made all the difference. The texture between my fingers was gritty and familiar, like touching memory itself. 2 cups, just like Mama always said. Measure with your heart, baby girl, not just your eyes. The buttermilk came next, thick and tangy when I opened the carton. The smell hit me sharp and clean, not like the regular milk Marcus bought, but the real kind that separated if you didn't shake it first. I poured it slow, watching it pool white against the yellow meal, and suddenly I was 8 years old again, standing in Mama's kitchen while she told me the secret wasn't in the recipe, it was in the love you stirred into it. You gotta talk to your cornbread, Bernie, she used to say, her brown hands guiding mine on the wooden spoon. Tell it what kind of day you're having, what you need it to do for your family. Cornbread listens better than most people. I cracked 3 eggs against the bowl's edge, watching the yolks break golden and thick. The shells went into the trash, but I kept one piece, rolling it between my palm and the counter until the calcium crumbled to dust. Another one of Mama's tricks. Eggshells made the bread rise higher, she claimed, though I never knew if that was science or superstition. The bacon grease came from the coffee can I kept on the back of the stove, solid white fat that melted into liquid gold when I spooned it into the cast iron skillet. The pan had been Mama's too, seasoned with decades of Sunday dinners and late-night comfort food. It hissed when the grease hit it, a sound like secrets being whispered. I stirred the batter with Mama's wooden spoon, the handle worn smooth from years of her hands, then mine. The motion was meditation, clockwise, always clockwise, folding the wet into the dry until it just came together. Don't overwork it, Mama's voice echoed in my memory. Cornbread don't like to be fussed with too much, just like people. The oven was already hot, 425 degrees, and when I slid the skillet in, the batter sizzled against the cast iron edges. 25 minutes, and I'd have something to show for this day besides a broken heart and a head full of questions. I leaned against the counter, my palms flat against the cool formica, and let the kitchen sounds wash over me. The oven humming, the refrigerator cycling on, the distant sound of Marcus laughing at something on TV. Normal sounds in a house that didn't feel normal anymore. The smell started building after 10 minutes. That toasted corn scent that meant home. That meant Sunday dinners and church potlucks and everything good about being raised in Mama's house. I closed my eyes and breathed it in deep, trying to remember the last time I'd made cornbread just because I wanted to. Not because Marcus asked for it or because we were having company. When had I stopped cooking for myself? The kitchen timer was one of those old wind-up ones, shaped like a tomato, that Mama had given me when I got married. Every kitchen needs a timer that talks back, she'd said, and she was right. When it went off, it didn't just ding, it rattled like it was personally offended by being ignored. I pulled the cornbread from the oven, the top golden brown and pulling slightly from the edges of the pan. Perfect. The way Mama taught me, the way her mama taught her. 4 generations of women who knew that sometimes you had to feed yourself before you could feed anybody else. I cut a wedge while it was still steaming, slathered it with real butter that melted into the crumb, and took a bite standing right there at the stove. The taste was everything I remembered. Slightly sweet, dense but tender, with that hint of bacon grease that made it rich as Sunday morning. And that's when it hit me. This was the first thing I'd made for myself in years. Not for Marcus, not for company, not because it was expected. Just for me, because my hands needed something to do, and my heart needed something familiar to hold on to. I looked around the kitchen, really looked, and saw how much of myself I'd tucked into corners. The good china we never used, still in boxes from our last move 3 years ago. The spice rack full of seasonings I'd bought for recipes I'd never tried, because Marcus preferred simple food. The cookbook collection gathering dust because he always wanted the same 5 meals rotated through the week. When had I become a guest in my own kitchen? The cornbread sat warm in my stomach, solid and comforting, while I washed the mixing bowl in water hot enough to sting. Through the window above the sink, I could see Mrs. Patterson next door hanging laundry on her line. Even though it was nearly evening, she'd been doing that for 30 years, hanging clothes when the spirit moved her, not when it was convenient for anyone else. I dried my hands on the dish towel Jasmine had embroidered for me in high school. World's Best Mom, in crooked blue letters that I'd always treasured because they came from her heart. Tomorrow, I'd have to figure out what to do about Marcus and Keisha, and 23 years of marriage that suddenly felt like 23 years of sleepwalking. But tonight, I had cornbread I'd made with my own hands, in my mama's skillet, using her recipe and her wisdom. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, that felt like enough. The cornbread was still warm on the counter when I heard Marcus's footsteps coming toward the kitchen. Heavy, deliberate steps that used to make my heart skip when we were young, back when his presence meant safety instead of this hollow ache that settled in my chest like smoke. "Smells good in here," he said from the doorway, and I didn't turn around. I kept my hands busy wiping down the already clean counter, the dish rag rough against my palms. "You made cornbread this late?" "Couldn't sleep." The words came out steady, which surprised me. Inside, I felt like broken glass held together by nothing but prayer and stubbornness. He moved closer, and I caught a whiff of his cologne, the same polo black he'd worn for 15 years. But now I wondered if Keisha liked that scent, if she buried her face in his neck and breathed it in like I used to. The thought made my stomach clench tight as a fist. "You want some?" I cut another piece, the knife scraping against the cast iron with a sound sharp as judgment. My hands stayed steady even though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. "You know I prefer the boxed kind." His voice carried that patient tone he used when he thought I was being difficult. "Yours is too dense. Dense. Like the weight of 23 years of him preferring everything simple, convenient, easy. Like the weight of me shrinking myself down to fit whatever version of a wife he could tolerate that day." I turned around then, really looked at him for the first time since I'd found those messages. He was leaning against the doorframe in his pajama pants and old Howard University t-shirt, scrolling through his phone with the casual attention of a man with nothing to hide. The same phone that had been buzzing yesterday. The same phone that held pictures of another woman's body, another woman's laugh, another woman's plans for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Marcus. His name felt strange in my mouth, like a word I'd forgotten how to pronounce. "We need to talk." His thumb stopped moving across the screen. Something shifted in his posture, subtle as a door closing. "About what?" The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, the yellow walls pressing in like they were listening. I could hear the ice maker dropping cubes in the freezer, a sound like dice being rolled, like chances being taken. "About us. About things." He set his phone face down on the counter, and I noticed how his hand lingered there, protective. "Bernie, it's almost midnight. Can't this wait till—" "No." The word came out harder than I intended, sharp enough to cut through 23 years of me waiting. Me accommodating. Me making myself small enough to fit around the edges of his life. "It can't wait." The silence stretched between us like a wire pulled taut. In the distance, I could hear Mrs. Patterson's dog barking at something in the night, probably a raccoon getting into her garbage again. Normal sounds from a normal world, where wives didn't stand in their kitchens at midnight wondering if their husbands had ever really loved them at all. Marcus rubbed his forehead, a gesture I recognized from every argument we'd ever avoided having. "Look, if this is about me working late again—" "Are you happy, Marcus?" The question hung in the air between us like incense smoke, heavy and impossible to ignore. He blinked, caught off guard, and for a moment I saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, maybe, or guilt. But it passed so quick, I might have imagined it. "What kind of question is that?" "A simple one." I crossed my arms over my chest, felt the soft cotton of my nightgown against my skin. "Are you happy? In this marriage? With this life? With me?" His jaw tightened. "Bernie, I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but—" "Answer the question." We stared at each other across the kitchen, and I realized this was the first time in years, maybe ever, that I'd demanded something from him instead of just hoping he'd offer it freely. The fluorescent light above us hummed like a trapped insect, casting everything in that harsh white glow that made even healthy people look sick. "Of course I'm happy." But his voice carried no conviction, just the flat tone of a man reciting lines he'd memorized but never felt. "We have a good life, Bernie. A good house, good jobs. Jasmine's doing well in college." "That's not what I asked." My voice was steady now, rooted in something deeper than anger. "I asked if you're happy. With me. With us." He picked up his phone again, thumb hovering over the screen like he was thinking about running. And maybe he was. Maybe that's what the past few months had been. A slow-motion sprint toward the door, toward Keisha, toward whatever promised to fill the empty spaces that had grown between us like weeds. I think you're overthinking things, he said finally. We're fine, Bernie. We're good. Fine. Good. Words that meant nothing, that covered everything, that let him sleep peacefully while I lay awake, wondering when we'd stopped being great, when we'd stopped being anything at all. I walked over to where he stood, close enough to smell his toothpaste, close enough to see the tiny scar above his left eyebrow from when he fell off his bike at 8 years old, close enough to remember falling in love with this man when we were both young enough to believe love was enough. I found your phone yesterday, I said quietly. The one you left on the coffee table, unlocked. His face went completely still. Not surprised, still, like a deer in headlights, like a man who'd just realized the ground beneath his feet was quicksand. Bernie, how long? My voice didn't shake. I was proud of that. How long have you been seeing her? The silence that followed was answer enough. It stretched and stretched until it filled every corner of the kitchen, every space between us, every year of our marriage that suddenly felt like a lie I'd been telling myself. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. It's not what you think. But it was exactly what I thought. And for the first time since I'd found those messages, I felt something other than heartbreak. I felt the solid weight of truth, heavy as Mama's cast iron skillet, sharp as her best knife. I felt ready to use both. The truth hung between us like smoke from Mama's old cigarettes, thick, choking, impossible to ignore. Marcus's face had gone ashy, that particular gray that happens when black skin drains of all its warmth. I watched him swallow hard, his Adam's apple working like he was trying to force down words that wanted to crawl back up his throat. Bernie, please. How long? I asked again, and this time my voice carried the weight of every Sunday sermon I'd ever heard about patience running thin, about even Job having his limits. His hands found the edge of the counter, gripping it like it might keep him from drowning. The smell of my cornbread still lingered in the air, molasses sweet and buttery, mixing with the sharp scent of his fierce sweat. It made my stomach turn, this collision of comfort and betrayal in the space where I'd fed our family for over 2 decades. 6 months, he whispered, and the number hit me like a slap. 6 months of working late. 6 months of distance. 6 months of me thinking I was losing my mind, that I was being paranoid, that good wives don't question their husbands. I felt my knees go weak, but I locked them straight, felt the cool tile through my house slippers, grounding me to this moment, this kitchen, this life that was cracking apart like old paint in summer heat. 6 months. I tasted the words, bitter as burnt coffee. And tomorrow at 2 p.m.? His eyes widened, caught. How did you? I read everything, Marcus. Every message, every picture. My voice stayed steady, even as my heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to break free. Every plan you made with her in places you promised to take me. He dropped his head, shoulders caving in like a building giving up its fight against time. When he looked back up, his eyes were wet, but I felt nothing. No urge to comfort him, no instinct to make this easier. Just the strange calm that comes when you finally stop pretending the ground isn't shaking beneath your feet. I never meant for it to happen, he said, and I almost laughed at how predictable he was, even in this moment. Even now, he couldn't take full responsibility, couldn't just say, I wanted her more than I wanted you. But it did happen. I walked to the stove, ran my fingers along the smooth enamel surface where I'd cooked thousands of meals for this man, where I'd stood stirring pots while he told me about his day, back when he still told me true things. Every day for 6 months, it kept happening. The house settled around us with a soft creak, like it was adjusting to hold this new weight of honesty. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Williams' porch light still burning bright. She always left it on for her granddaughter, who worked the night shift at the hospital. Some people still kept their promises. "She's 26, Marcus." I turned back to face him, watched him flinch at the number. "Younger than our daughter." "It's not about her age." "Then what's it about?" The question came out sharp enough to cut glass. "What is it about her that makes you drive across town at midnight? What is it about her that makes you take her to the places I've been asking you to try for years?" He opened his mouth, then closed it, opened it again. But no words came, just the soft wheeze of air being pulled through a man who'd finally run out of excuses. I reached into the cabinet above the sink, pulled down Mama's old mason jar where she used to keep her emergency money. My emergency money now. Bills I'd been saving for something special, for a trip we'd never take, for a dream we'd never chase together. "What are you doing?" Marcus asked, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "Getting dressed." I counted out $300, crisp 20s and 10s that smelled like the bank envelope they'd been sleeping in. "Going to my sister's." "Bernie, wait." "No." The word came out clean and final. "I'm done waiting. Done making excuses for you. Done pretending this marriage isn't broken just because the pieces are still sitting in the same house." I could hear him following me as I walked toward the stairs, his bare feet slapping against the hardwood like applause for a performance nobody wanted to see. The banister felt solid under my palm, worn smooth by decades of hands, mine, his, Jasmine's, when she was small enough to slide down it giggling. "Where are you going to go?" he called after me, and something in his tone made me pause on the third step. Not concern for my well-being, desperation. Fear that I might actually leave, that I might actually mean it this time. I turned around, looked down at this man I'd loved since I was 24 years old. This man who'd held my hand through Mama's funeral and Jasmine's first heartbreak and every ordinary Tuesday in between. He looked smaller somehow, standing there in his old Lakers t-shirt, with his phone still clutched in his hand, like a lifeline to a world where I didn't know what I knew. "To Denise's," I said, naming my sister who'd been telling me for months that something wasn't right, who'd been watching me get smaller and quieter and more apologetic for taking up space in my own life. "And then I'm going to figure out what comes next." "Bernie, please, we can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can—" "You're seeing her tomorrow at 2 p.m. My voice echoed in the stairwell, bouncing off walls that had heard us laugh and fight, and make love, and make plans that apparently meant more to me than they ever did to him. "Are you still going?" The silence stretched so long, I thought maybe he hadn't heard me. But then he looked up, met my eyes for the first time since I'd said her name, and I saw the answer written across his face, like a confession. "I have to," he whispered. "I owe her an explanation." And there it was, the final nail, the last word, the period at the end of a sentence I'd been writing for 23 years. I nodded once, turned back up the stairs, and went to pack. The bedroom felt like a museum of a life I wasn't sure I wanted anymore. 23 years of shared space, shared dreams, shared lies spread out across surfaces that suddenly looked foreign in the lamplight. I pulled my old suitcase from the closet, the navy blue Samsonite Mama had bought me for college, and the zipper made that familiar grinding sound, metal teeth catching on fabric worn thin by decades of use. My hands moved without my mind directing them, folding blouses and slacks with the automatic precision of a woman who'd packed for business trips and family vacations and weekend visits to relatives who asked too many questions about why I looked tired all the time. The cotton of my favorite church dress felt soft between my fingers, the emerald green one that made my skin glow. The one Marcus used to say made me look like a queen. When was the last time he'd said that? When was the last time he'd looked at me long enough to notice what I was wearing? From downstairs came the sound of the refrigerator humming to life, ice maker dropping cubes into the tray with sharp little plinks. Normal house sounds, the kind that used to comfort me when I couldn't sleep, when I'd lie awake listening to our home breathe around us. Now they felt like a countdown, marking time until I walked out that door. I opened my jewelry box, the wooden one with the ballerina that used to spin when Jasmine was little, and the melody tinkled out, tinny and off-key after all these years. My wedding rings sat in their velvet slot, white gold catching the light like promises I'd believed in. I picked them up, felt their weight in my palm. 23 years of wearing them had left a pale band around my finger, skin that had forgotten what it felt like to be bare. "Bernie?" Marcus's voice drifted up from the bottom of the stairs, careful and tentative, like he was approaching a wounded animal. "Can we talk about this?" I slipped the rings into the side pocket of my purse, zipped it shut with hands that weren't shaking anymore. Funny how calm felt once you stopped fighting it, once you stopped trying to hold water in a broken cup. In the bathroom, I gathered my moisturizer, the expensive kind with shea butter and vitamin E that I bought myself because Marcus always said drugstore lotion worked just fine. My silk scarf, the burgundy one with gold edges that Denise had brought me from her trip to Ghana, slipped through my fingers like liquid. Everything I touched felt significant now, weighted with the knowledge that I might not be coming back to this house, this room, this life that had felt so permanent just hours ago. The floorboards creaked under Marcus's feet as he climbed the stairs, each step deliberate and heavy. I could picture him gripping the banister, using it to pull himself up like an old man, though he was only 49. When had he started moving like that? When had I stopped noticing? "What about Jasmine?" he asked from the doorway, and I caught his reflection in the bathroom mirror. Rumpled, desperate, holding his phone like it might ring with an answer that would fix this mess. "What are we going to tell her?" I turned around, faced him across the space that used to feel intimate and now felt like a courtroom. "We're going to tell her the truth, that her father fell in love with someone else, and her mother decided she deserved better than being second choice." He flinched like I'd slapped him. "It's not love, Bernie. It's just... don't." I held up my hand, and he stopped mid-sentence. "Don't make it worse by lying about what it is. You think I don't know the difference between love and everything else? You think I haven't been watching you choose her over me every single day for 6 months?" The silence stretched between us, filled with the sound of the grandfather clock downstairs chiming midnight. Mama's clock, the one she'd left me because she said every woman needed something in her house that told her when it was time to go. I walked past him to the dresser, pulled out my good underwear, the lace set I'd bought, hoping he'd notice, hoping we might find our way back to each other through touch if words weren't working. The tags were still on. I cut them off with the little scissors from my sewing kit, the snip sharp and final in the quiet room. "Where are you really going?" Marcus asked, and something in his voice made me look up, not the desperate wheedling from before, but something deeper. Fear, maybe. Or recognition that this time was different, that I wasn't just threatening to leave. I was actually doing it. "I told you, Denise's." I folded the lingerie carefully, placed it in the suitcase next to my work clothes and church dresses and the comfortable jeans I wore for grocery shopping and Saturday morning cleaning. A whole life reduced to what could fit in one bag. "And then what?" I stopped packing, really looked at him for the first time since this conversation started. He was still handsome, the same strong jaw and deep brown eyes that had made my heart skip when I was 24, and thought love was enough to build a life on. But there were lines around his eyes now, gray threading through his hairline, and something else. Something that looked like genuine panic at the thought of losing me. Too late for that, I thought, but didn't say it out loud. Then I figure out who I am when I'm not pretending to be happy. I closed the suitcase, pulled the zipper around its perimeter. Then I remember what it feels like to be someone's first choice instead of their consolation prize. You were never... Yes, I was. I lifted the suitcase off the bed, felt its weight settle in my hand. Every time you chose work over our anniversary dinner, every time you said you were too tired for the things I wanted to do, but had energy for everything else. Every time you made me feel like asking for your attention was asking for too much. I walked to the dresser one last time, picked up the framed photo of us on our wedding day. We looked so young, so sure that love would be enough. I was wearing Mama's pearls and the biggest smile, and Marcus was looking at me like I was the only woman in the world. Keep this, I said, setting it back down. Remember what it used to feel like to want me. I walked past him toward the door, my heels clicking on the hardwood with the same rhythm as my heartbeat. At the threshold, I turned back one last time. When you see her tomorrow at 2, I said, tell her she can have you, all of you. The good and the bad and the man who promises things he doesn't mean. But tell her this too. Tell her that loving you isn't enough if you don't love yourself enough to be faithful to it. And then I walked downstairs, grabbed my purse and keys from the kitchen counter, and stepped out into the night air that tasted like freedom. The night air wrapped around me like Mama's old church shawl. Cool cotton against my skin, carrying the scent of jasmine from Mrs. Patterson's yard and the distant smell of someone's late dinner still lingering in their kitchen. I drove through streets I knew by heart, muscle memory guiding me past the corner store, where I used to buy penny candy, past the house where my first best friend lived before her family moved to Atlanta. Denise's porch light was on, warm yellow spilling across her front steps like an invitation. I sat in the car for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, and watched the moths dance around that light. Such simple creatures. They saw brightness and moved toward it without question, without weighing the cost of wanting something that might burn them. When I knocked, Denise opened the door in her robe and slippers, took one look at my suitcase, and pulled me into arms that smelled like shea butter and the lavender soap she ordered special from that black-owned shop in Decatur. "Come on in here, sister," she said, and I followed her into the kitchen where she put the kettle on without asking what I needed. Some friendships run deeper than words. We'd been doing this dance since we were 12, taking turns being the one who needed holding and the one who did the holding. Her kitchen was smaller than mine, but warmer somehow, filled with plants that actually thrived and pictures of her grandchildren stuck to the refrigerator with magnets shaped like little praying hands. The wooden table where we sat was scarred from years of homework sessions and heart-to-heart talks, its surface worn smooth by countless cups of coffee and late-night conversations. "You want to talk about it?" she asked, setting a mug of chamomile tea in front of me. The steam rose between us, carrying the sweet, apple-like scent that always reminded me of being sick as a child, of Mama bringing me this same tea when the world felt too heavy to carry. I left him. The words came out flat, matter of fact, like I was reporting the weather. Finally left him. Denise nodded, sipped her tea, waited. She knew me well enough to know I'd get to the rest when I was ready. I wrapped my hands around the mug, let the heat seep into my palms. The ceramic was thick and slightly rough, handmade by her daughter during a pottery phase that lasted exactly 1 semester. Everything in Denise's house had a story, a history of love that showed in the imperfections. "You remember when we were kids?" I said. "And your grandmother used to make us help her with the church quilting circle?" Every Saturday morning, bright and early, you used to complain about pricking your fingers on those needles." I smiled at the memory. But she always said the same thing. "Baby, anything worth keeping takes time and patience, and a willingness to start over when you mess up the pattern." The tea was cooling in my hands, steam no longer rising. Through Denise's kitchen window, I could see the outlines of the vegetable garden she tended with the same devotion other women gave to their hair or their children. Tomato plants heavy with fruit, collard greens growing wild and proud, pepper plants that would burn your tongue clean if you weren't careful. "I kept trying to fix the pattern," I said, and my voice came out rough, like I'd been crying even though my eyes were dry. "Kept thinking if I was more patient, more understanding, more of whatever he needed me to be, the pattern would come out right. But you can't quilt with rotten thread, can you?" Denise reached across the table, covered my hand with hers. Her fingers were cool from holding the mug, but her palm was warm, steady. "No, baby, you can't." The grandfather clock in her living room chimed 1 o'clock, its deep brass voice echoing through the house. Different from Mama's clock, but carrying the same weight of time passing, of moments that couldn't be taken back or lived over. "I used to think love was supposed to be hard work," I said. "Mama always said marriage takes effort, that you have to choose each other every day. But there's a difference between working together to build something beautiful and working alone to hold together something that's falling apart." I stood up, walked to her sink, rinsed out my mug even though she would have told me to leave it. The water was warm against my hands, and I watched the last traces of tea swirl down the drain. Simple act, but it felt like ceremony, washing away the taste of old disappointments, making space for something new. "The guest room's made up," Denise said behind me. "Clean sheets, extra blankets in the closet. You stay as long as you need." I turned around, leaned against the counter. Her kitchen felt solid around me. Cast iron skillet hanging from a hook, wooden spoons in a ceramic jar, everything in its place and purposeful. This was what a home felt like when it was built by someone who loved herself enough to create beauty for her own joy, not just for other people's approval. "Thank you," I said, and meant it deeper than she could know. Not just for the bed or the tea or the listening ear, but for being the kind of friend who opens her door at midnight without questions. Who knows that sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is admit she deserves better than what she's been settling for. Outside, the night was settling deeper, crickets singing their ancient songs in the spaces between streetlights. I felt lighter than I had in months, like I'd been holding my breath for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to fill my lungs completely. For the first time in years, I was choosing myself first. The next morning came too early, sunlight filtering through Denise's sheer curtains like it was trying to be polite about waking me up. I'd barely slept, kept reaching across the narrow guest bed, expecting to find Marcus's warm back, then remembering where I was and why. The pillow smelled like lavender fabric softener instead of the unscented detergent I'd been buying for 23 years because it was cheaper. And Marcus said fancy soaps were a waste of money. I could hear Denise moving around in the kitchen, the familiar rhythm of her morning routine. Coffee percolating in that old glass pot she refused to replace. cabinet doors opening and closing with their particular squeaks and sighs. The smell of bacon drifted under the door, rich and smoky, making my stomach clench with hunger I hadn't felt in months. When I padded into the kitchen, still wearing the same clothes from yesterday, Denise looked up from the stove and studied my face with the kind of careful attention she used to give her students' artwork. "You look like you wrestled with angels all night and lost." "Feel like it too." I accepted the mug of coffee she handed me, black and strong enough to wake the dead. The first sip burned my tongue, but I welcomed the sharp sensation. "My phone's been buzzing since 6. "Marcus? 17 missed calls, 12 text messages." I pulled the phone from my pocket, its screen lighting up with another incoming call. His name flashed across the display, and I watched it ring until it went to voicemail. "He's probably just now realizing I took more than an overnight bag." Denise flipped the bacon, grease popping and sizzling in the cast-iron pan that had belonged to her mother. "You going to listen to what he's saying?" I scrolled through the messages without opening them, seeing fragments of words in the preview text. "Sorry" appeared in 3 of them. "Come home" in 2 more. "We can work this out" in another. The same promises he'd made after I found those credit card statements from restaurants I'd never been to, after I discovered he'd been telling his friends I was going through something, when I started asking questions about where he spent his evenings. "I already know what he's saying," I told her, setting the phone face down on the counter. "Same thing he always says when he gets caught. That it didn't mean anything, that I'm overreacting, that he loves me and wants to make it work." The bacon was done, and Denise moved it to a plate lined with paper towels, the grease making dark spots that spread like secrets across the white surface. She cracked eggs into the same pan, and they hit the hot grease with a violent hiss that reminded me of all the arguments Marcus and I had tried to have in whispers, all the anger we'd swallowed to keep the peace. "Question is," she said, not looking at me, focusing on the eggs like they required all her concentration, "what do you want to do about it?" Before I could answer, my phone rang again. Not Marcus this time. The display showed my sister Valerie's name, and my stomach dropped. Val never called before 9 unless something was wrong, and she definitely never called when she knew I should be getting ready for work on a Tuesday morning. "Hey, Val." I answered on the 3rd ring, trying to keep my voice steady. "Bernie, what the hell is going on?" Her voice came through sharp and worried, with that edge it got when she was trying not to lose her temper. "Marcus called me at 7:30 this morning, woke up the whole house, saying you'd lost your mind and run off in the middle of the night. He wants me to talk sense into you." I closed my eyes, felt the familiar burn of shame in my chest. Of course he'd called Val. Of course he'd made it sound like I was having some kind of breakdown instead of finally standing up for myself. "I'm fine, Val. I'm at Denise's." "You left your husband and went to spend the night at somebody's house like you're 16 years old. That's not fine. That's what?" The words came out harder than I'd intended, and Denise glanced over from the stove, eyebrows raised. "That's what, Val? Crazy? Selfish? Not what a good wife does?" Silence on the other end, then a sigh that sounded like disappointment wrapped in exhaustion. "Bernie, I'm not saying you don't have your reasons, but running away in the middle of the night, without even talking to him first, that's not like you." "Maybe that's the problem." I stood up, paced to the window, looked out at Denise's garden where the morning sun was catching dewdrops on the collard green leaves like tiny prisms. Maybe I've been, like me, for so long, I forgot who I actually am underneath all the accommodating and compromising and making excuses. What's that supposed to mean? It means I found text messages, Val, from some woman named Keisha. Messages that make it real clear Marcus has been getting something from her that he hasn't been getting from me. The words tasted bitter, like medicine I'd been avoiding taking for months, Another silence, longer this time. When Val spoke again, her voice was softer, more careful. "Oh, honey, are you sure? Maybe you misunderstood." I didn't misunderstand anything. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window, watched a cardinal land on Denise's bird feeder, and start pecking at the seeds with determined precision. And even if those messages were completely innocent, that's not the real problem. The real problem is that somewhere along the way, I stopped believing I deserved better. Denise appeared beside me with a plate of eggs and bacon, set it on the windowsill where I could reach it. The eggs were cooked exactly how I liked them. Over medium, white set, but yolks still soft enough to break with a fork. Marcus had never learned how I liked my eggs, even after all these years. Said it was easier to just scramble them all the same way. "Bernie," Val said, and I could hear her choosing her words carefully. "I know things haven't been perfect between you two, but marriage is hard work. Mama said a lot of things." I picked up a piece of bacon, bit into it, tasted salt and smoke, and the kind of satisfaction that comes from food cooked with attention instead of obligation. "But Mama also said never to let a man make you forget your own worth. And I've been forgetting for a long time." Through the phone, I heard the sounds of Val's morning routine. Coffee brewing, kids arguing in the background, the TV news murmuring about traffic and weather. Normal family chaos, the kind I used to think I wanted before I realized that peace without respect isn't really peace at all. "Just promise me you won't do anything permanent without thinking it through," Val said finally. "Sleep on it. Give yourself time to cool down." "I've been sleeping on it for months, Val. I'm done being cool about it." After I hung up, I sat back down at Denise's table and ate my breakfast in silence, letting the taste of perfectly seasoned eggs replace the bitter flavor of my sister's disappointment. Outside, the morning was getting brighter, and I could hear the neighborhood coming alive. Dogs barking, cars starting, the distant sound of children playing in someone's yard. My phone buzzed with another text from Marcus, and this time I opened it. "Please come home. We need to talk. I love you." I stared at the words until they stopped making sense, then deleted the message without responding. Love wasn't something you declared when you got caught. Love was something you showed every day in the small choices, the daily considerations, the way you made space for someone else's dreams alongside your own. For the first time in years, I was ready to find out what love looked like when it included loving myself. I was washing my breakfast plate when Denise's landline rang. The old-fashioned kind, with the curly cord that stretched across her kitchen like a lifeline. She answered it with her usual warmth, but her face changed quick, went from open to guarded in the space of a heartbeat. "Hold on," she said, covering the mouthpiece with her palm. "Bernie, it's your mama." The dish slipped from my hands back into the sudsy water with a soft splash. Mama. Of course Marcus had called her too, probably right after he'd gotten through disappointing my sister. I could already hear it in my head, his wounded voice telling her how I'd just up and left without warning, how he didn't understand what had gotten into me, how he was worried about my state of mind. I dried my hands on the dish towel, feeling the rough cotton against my palms, and took the phone. "Hey, Mama. Bernadette Rochelle Williams." The full name, spoken in that tone that could still make me feel 12 years old and caught stealing cookies before dinner. "What in God's name has gotten into you?" "Marcus called you." It wasn't a question. "That boy called me crying. Said you packed up and left him in the middle of the night like some kind of thief. Said you won't answer his calls, won't talk to him, won't even come home to get your things properly." Her voice carried that particular mix of disappointment and disbelief that she'd perfected over 73 years of dealing with her children's questionable choices. I raised you better than this. I leaned against Denise's counter, felt the cool formica against my back, and watched morning sunlight stream through her yellow curtains, painting everything the color of butter and hope. You raised me to know my worth, Mama. You raised me to never let anybody treat me less than I deserve. And Marcus treats you bad? That man works every day, comes home every night, never raised a hand to you? You got a nice house, a good car, everything you need. He's cheating on me, Mama. The words hung in the air like incense smoke, heavy and impossible to take back. Through the phone, I heard the sharp intake of breath, then silence so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in her living room 2 neighborhoods away. You sure about that? Her voice was different now, quieter, more careful. The voice she used when one of us was really hurt, not just being dramatic. I saw the messages, from some woman named Keisha. Pictures too. My throat felt tight, like I was swallowing around broken glass, but I kept going. Messages going back months, Mama, maybe longer. Another silence, and I could picture her in her kitchen, probably standing by the window that looked out over her rose bushes, the ones Daddy had planted the year before he died. She'd be wearing her good robe, the blue one with the little flowers, and her hair would still be wrapped in the silk scarf she'd worn to bed. That fool, she said finally, and the disappointment in her voice wasn't for me anymore. That goddamn fool. Mama never cursed. Not even damn. Not even when she hit her thumb with a hammer putting up pictures, or when the church ladies got on her nerves with their gossip. Hearing those words in her voice felt like watching something sacred crack open. I should have seen it coming, she continued, and I could hear her settling into a chair, could picture her rubbing her temples the way she did when she was trying to make sense of something senseless. Man starts finding fault with everything you do, starts making you feel small. That's usually when they're trying to justify something they know ain't right. I slid down the counter until I was sitting on Denise's kitchen floor, my back against the cabinet, phone pressed to my ear like a lifeline. The linoleum was cool under my legs, and I could smell the faint scent of the pine sol she'd used to mop yesterday morning. I keep thinking about what you used to tell us, I said. About how Daddy never made you feel like you had to choose between being loved and being yourself. Your daddy was a good man. Her voice was soft now, full of memory and grief that 20 years hadn't quite healed. Not perfect, Lord knows, but good. He used to say that loving somebody meant wanting them to shine, not trying to dim their light so yours looked brighter. I closed my eyes, let myself remember Sunday dinners when I was little, how Daddy would listen to Mama talk about her book club, or her garden, or her plans to take classes at the community college, how his face would light up like she was telling him about winning the lottery, how he'd brag to his friends about her cornbread recipe, or the way she could grow tomatoes sweeter than candy. When was the last time Marcus had looked at me like that? When was the last time he'd seemed proud to be married to me instead of resigned to it? I'm scared, Mama. The words came out in a whisper, but they felt loud as thunder in Denise's quiet kitchen. I'm 47 years old, and I don't know who I am without him. I don't know if I'm strong enough to start over. Baby girl. Her voice was warm as her arms around me when I was small, when the world seemed too big and I seemed too little to handle it. You think I wasn't scared when your daddy died? Think I wasn't terrified I'd mess up raising y'all by myself? Or that I'd never figure out how to be just me instead of half of us? Through the window, I watched Denise in her backyard, hanging wet clothes on the line that stretched between two oak trees. Her movements were practiced, efficient, but there was something meditative about the way she shook out each piece, pinned it carefully to catch the morning breeze. She'd been taking care of herself for 15 years, ever since her divorce, and she'd made it look like freedom instead of failure. "But you did figure it out," I said. "I did, and you will too, because that's what we do, Bernie. We figure it out. We adapt. We survive." She paused, and I could hear her getting up, probably moving to put the kettle on for her morning tea. "But surviving and thriving are two different things, baby. And you deserve to thrive." My phone buzzed with another text from Marcus, but I didn't even look at it. For the first time in months, his urgency felt less important than my own peace. "What should I do, Mama?" "What does your heart tell you to do?" I thought about it, really thought about it. Not what my fear told me, or my guilt, or my worry about what people would think. What my heart told me. "I want to come home," I said. "Not to Marcus, to me. I want to come home to myself." "Then that's what you do." Her voice was steady as bedrock, sure as Sunday morning. "And whatever you need from me while you're finding your way, you got it. You understand me?" I understood. For the first time in months, maybe years, I understood exactly where I stood and what I needed to do next. After I hung up, I sat on Denise's floor for a long time, listening to the sounds of her house settling around me, feeling something shift inside my chest like tectonic plates finding their proper position. When I finally stood up, my legs felt steady underneath me, my hands sure and calm. I picked up my phone and typed a message to Marcus. "I'll be by tomorrow to get more of my things. Please don't be there." Then I deleted his number from my contacts. Some bridges, once you burn them, light the way forward. The confrontation came at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, standing in the middle of my own living room with my sister Denise beside me for support, facing Marcus's mama, Miss Dorothy, who'd let herself in with the spare key like she still had the right. "You think you can just walk away from 23 years like it don't mean nothing?" Miss Dorothy's voice filled up the whole room, sharp as the sound of cast iron hitting concrete. She stood there in her good church dress, navy blue with tiny pearl buttons, like she was about to deliver a sermon, her purse clutched in both hands like a weapon. I could smell her white shoulders' perfume mixing with the pine sol I'd used to clean yesterday, creating something bitter in the air between us. My hands were shaking, but I pressed them flat against my thighs, feeling the rough denim of my jeans grounding me to this moment, to this decision I was finally making real. 23 years means everything to me, Miss Dorothy," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. "That's why I can't waste another day pretending they were good ones." "Pretending?" Her brown eyes flashed, and I could see where Marcus got that look, the one that made you feel small and wrong, even when you knew you weren't. "That man has provided for you, kept a roof over your head, never raised a hand to you. What more you want?" Denise stepped closer to me, and I felt the warmth of her arm brushing mine, smelled the cocoa butter she rubbed on her elbows every morning. She didn't say anything, but her presence was solid as a church pew, reminding me I wasn't alone in this. "I want to feel alive in my own house," I said, and the words came from somewhere deep in my chest, somewhere I'd kept locked away for so long I'd forgotten it existed. I want to cook without wondering if the seasoning's gonna set 'em off. I want to wear what I want to wear, talk to who I want to talk to, be who I am without asking permission. The afternoon sun was streaming through the windows I'd cleaned just that morning, painting everything golden. the family photos on the mantel, the throw pillows I'd arranged and rearranged 100 times trying to make this house feel like home. But standing here now, I realized it had never been home. It had been a museum where I was both the curator and the exhibit, carefully maintained, but never truly living. "That's selfish talk," Miss Dorothy said, but something in her voice had shifted, gone softer around the edges. "Marriage is about sacrifice, about putting the family first." "Whose family?" The question came out harder than I meant it to, but I didn't take it back. Because I sacrificed myself so much, there ain't enough left of me to be family to anybody? I can't love Marcus the way he deserves if I don't even know who I am anymore. I could taste salt on my lips and realized I was crying, but these weren't the desperate, helpless tears I'd shed in bathroom mirrors for months. These felt clean, like rain washing dust off summer leaves. My chest was tight, but it was the tightness of something breaking open, not closing down. "You know what your son told me last week?" I said, and my voice was getting stronger with each word. "He said maybe if I lost some weight, he wouldn't have to work so hard to find me attractive." Said it real casual, like he was commenting on the weather. Miss Dorothy's face went still, and I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or memory. "He said maybe if I didn't talk so much when his friends came over, they'd want to visit more often. Said maybe if I learned to take a joke, I wouldn't be so sensitive about everything." The words were pouring out now like water from a broken dam. 23 years of small cuts and paper wounds that had never healed because they never stopped coming. He made me feel like I was too much of everything. Too loud, too opinionated, too needy, too sensitive, too fat, too boring, too happy, too sad. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, tasted the salt and soap residue from washing dishes that morning. And I started believing him. Started making myself smaller and quieter, and less until I disappeared right there in plain sight. The house was so quiet, I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, could hear a lawnmower running somewhere down the street, could hear my own heartbeat loud as thunder in my ears. Miss Dorothy was looking at me like she was seeing me for the first time, and maybe she was. "My mama raised me to know my worth," I said, and I could feel Mama's voice joining mine, could feel 3 generations of strong women standing behind me in this moment. "She raised me to believe I deserved to be loved for who I am, not despite who I am. And I forgot that. I let your son make me forget that." "Bernie?" Miss Dorothy started, but I held up my hand. "I'm not asking you to choose sides," I said. "I'm not asking you to stop loving your son, but I'm also not asking your permission to save my own life." The silence stretched between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we wanted to cross. I could smell the coffee I'd made that morning, still warm in the pot, mixing with the scent of the gardenias blooming outside the window. Everything felt hyper-real. The texture of the carpet under my bare feet, the sound of Denise breathing beside me, the weight of 23 years settling around my shoulders, and then, suddenly, lifting. Miss Dorothy set her purse down on the coffee table and sank into the armchair that had been Marcus's favorite, the one I'd never been allowed to sit in because it would mess up the cushions. She looked older than I'd ever seen her, her carefully styled hair slightly mussed, her lipstick worn off at the corners. "His daddy used to tell me I was too much sometimes," she said quietly. "Said I talked too much at church, laughed too loud at family gatherings. Said maybe if I learned to tone it down, he wouldn't have to work so hard to keep up with me." My heart clenched, recognizing the echo of my own pain in her words. I sat down on the couch across from her, Denise settling beside me like a guardian angel in denim and gold hoops. "What did you do?" I asked. I toned it down. She looked up at me, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I toned it down until I forgot what my real voice sounded like. And when he died, I had to spend years learning how to be loud again. We sat there in the golden afternoon light, 3 women who'd loved the same man in different ways, who'd all paid the price for making themselves smaller to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold us whole. I don't want to learn how to be loud again when I'm 70, I said. I want to remember now, while I still have time to use my voice for something beautiful. Miss Dorothy nodded slowly, like she was agreeing with something she'd been arguing with herself about for years. What you gonna do? I'm gonna figure out who I am when nobody's watching, I said. I'm gonna eat what I want and wear what I want and take up all the space I need. I'm gonna love myself first, and then maybe I'll have something real to offer somebody else. And Marcus? I thought about my husband, really thought about him, not the version of him I'd been trying to fix or change or accommodate, but the man he actually was. Marcus is gonna have to figure out if he wants a wife or a shadow, because I'm done being a shadow. When Miss Dorothy left an hour later, she hugged me at the door, really hugged me, not the polite church lady embrace we'd been sharing for decades, but a real hug that said she saw me, finally saw me. You call me if you need anything, she said. You're still family, no matter what happens next. After she drove away, I stood in my living room, and felt my body remember what it was like to take up space without apologizing for it. The afternoon light was painting everything gold, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was made of the same precious metal. I was 47 years old, and I was finally ready to meet myself. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in Mama's kitchen, watching her hands work cornmeal into the cast iron skillet, the same way she'd done since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. The smell of bacon grease and fresh cornbread filled the air, mixing with the bergamot from her afternoon Earl Grey and the faint scent of cocoa butter that always seemed to live in the walls of this house. You look different, she said, without turning around, her wooden spoon scraping against the iron in that familiar rhythm that meant home. Not just the hair. I touched the natural coils I'd been letting grow out these past weeks, feeling their soft texture against my fingertips. No more relaxers, no more trying to make myself into something I wasn't. Feel different too. Good different or scared different? Both, I think. I sipped the sweet tea she'd made, sugar thick the way I'd loved it as a child, the way I'd stopped drinking it because Marcus said it was too much. Now it tasted like permission. Is that okay? Mama turned then, her brown eyes studying my face like she was reading a book she'd written herself. Baby, scared just means you're paying attention. Different means you're growing. Both together means you're exactly where you need to be. The kitchen timer dinged, and she pulled the cornbread from the oven, the golden top crackling as cool air hit it. Through the window, I could hear the church bells from Mount Olive starting their evening call, the same bells that had marked time in this neighborhood for 40 years. But today, they sounded like celebration instead of obligation. Marcus came by yesterday, Mama said, setting the skillet on a cooling rack. My chest tightened, but not with the old panic. What did he want? To ask me to talk sense into you. She sat down across from me at the worn wooden table where I'd done homework and shared secrets and learned what it meant to be a woman. I told him the sense was already talked into you. Took 47 years, but it finally took root. I laughed, surprising myself with the sound. When was the last time I'd laughed without checking first to see if it was too loud? What did he say to that? Said he was willing to try counseling. Mama's fingers drummed against the table, a habit she'd passed down to me along with her stubborn chin and her way of humming while she cooked. Said he wanted to learn how to love you better. The words settled between us like a question I wasn't ready to answer. Outside, Mrs. Johnson was calling her grandkids in for dinner, her voice carrying the authority of generations. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Normal sounds of normal life continuing, whether I figured my own out or not. I don't know if I believe him, I said finally. And I don't know if it matters if I do. It don't have to matter today, Mama said. Healing takes time. Figuring yourself out takes time. Ain't no rush on any of it. I broke off a piece of cornbread, still warm, and tasted butter melting on my tongue. Simple pleasure, simple nourishment. Denise thinks I should file for separation. What do you think? I think I want to wake up tomorrow morning and know what I want for breakfast without asking anybody else first. I met her eyes. I think I want to learn how to be alone without being lonely. That's a good place to start. We sat in comfortable silence while the cornbread cooled and the afternoon light shifted from gold to amber through the lace curtains Mama had hung when I was still in high school. My phone buzzed. A text from my sister Denise asking if I wanted to come to dinner Sunday. Another from my cousin Tisha sharing a funny meme. Another from Sister Williams at church checking if I needed anything from the grocery store. Women holding me up without being asked, the way we always had, the way we always would. I got something for you, Mama said, getting up and disappearing into the back bedroom. She came back with a small wooden box I remembered from childhood, the one where she kept her most precious things. From it, she pulled out a thin gold bracelet, simple and worn smooth with age. This was your great-grandmother's, she said, fastening it around my wrist. She wore it through 2 husbands, raised 6 children, and outlived them both. When she gave it to me, she said it was to remind me that I was complete all by myself. Anything else was just extra blessing. The metal was warm against my skin, lighter than my wedding rings had been, but somehow more substantial. I twisted my wrist, watching it catch the kitchen light, and felt something settle in my chest that had been restless for years. I'm scared, Mama, I said. I know, baby. She covered my hand with hers, her skin soft as worn cotton, strong as oak roots. But you're not scared of the same things anymore. You used to be scared of taking up too much space. Now you're scared of not taking up enough. That's the kind of scared that leads somewhere good. When I drove back to Denise's that evening, the sun was setting behind the pine trees that lined Highway 78, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. My great-grandmother's bracelet moved gently against my wrist as I shifted gears, a whispered reminder that I came from a long line of women who had survived, who had thrived, who had made their own way when the path wasn't clear. At the next red light, I rolled down the windows and let the evening air fill the car, warm and thick with the promise of summer, carrying the scent of honeysuckle and fresh-cut grass and possibility. When the light turned green, I pressed the gas and felt the engine respond, felt myself moving forward through space and time toward something I couldn't name yet, but was no longer afraid to meet. I was 47 years old, and I was finally learning how to be my own destination. In the rearview mirror, the road behind me stretched back toward everything I used to be. But ahead, the highway curved and disappeared into the gathering dusk, and I couldn't see where it led. For the first time in my adult life, that felt like exactly the right amount of knowing.